Life is sweet. Let it sweep you off your feet.
Hi, this is Allie, and this is Find Your Joy. And I'm really excited today. Today I have one of my dearest friends, and more than that, though, she is Auntie Kate. So we know Auntie Kate, many of us from Auntie Kate and the Uncles of Funk and the adventures she's taken us musically. But there's a side to Auntie Kate that not everyone knows about, and I think that we really do need to get to know a little bit more about this. I've been blessed over the years to hear many of her incredible stories of her family's heritage and how she's studied her genealogy and learned so much about it. And today, and in the coming episodes, she's going to share with us a little bit about how she started that, the adventures of Uncle Paul. Many stories are going to come out, and we're going to learn a lot about this, and I'm really excited. Hi, Kate.
Hello, Allie. I don't know how blessed you've been having to put up with all of my ramblings over the years, but you're a good sport. You hang in there.
I love it, and what it's done for me is I've always been, as you know, really curious about my own heritage, but you've taught me a lot about not just how to look into it more, but really understand the why. I didn't even understand, I don't think, so much why I was so curious. So let's start a little bit wherever you'd like to start. Maybe, I'd love people to meet Uncle Paul. Is that where you'd like to start? Because I think that's where a lot of it starts for me anyways, in my mind.
Sure. Uncle Paul was... He was the one that really started me down this path of knowing your ancestors, knowing where you came from and how important it is. He was, by the time he was 14 years old, he was like pretty much quadriplegic. He had, rheumatoid arthritis. Oh. Back in the 40s, 50s, they really didn't know how to treat it. So it did, his joints all calcified, and so he just couldn't move. He was just quadriplegic. So he was stuck at home. And so all his brothers and sisters were out doing the fishing and doing the gardening and all of the chores. And there were many of them. He was one of 16 kids. So he was stuck at home with his mother because he could not move about. And so she probably took it as her kuleana, her responsibility to keep him entertained, basically. And so she started telling him all the stories about her father, her grandfather, teaching him what she knew. And he took that and ran with it. I never met my grandmother. She died in 1943, long before I was around. But he took these stories, this history she had told him. It was all oral history. Oral history is a really important way for Indigenous peoples to tell their story and their customs and everything. Most of it was not written down. It's just oral history. They tell you what to do and you do it,
right?
Or listen to me. Listen, as Uncle Paul used to say. Come here. He'd tell all. There was eight of us in my family, 5 girls, 3 boys. But the 2 older girls were gone long before I came along. They were much older than me. But the 6 of us, my 3 brothers and the 3 younger girls, myself included, Uncle Paul would tell us, hey, come here. And of course, like he couldn't reach out and grab us. He was sort of we had him captive. And we ran around kids, we say, come here, sit down now, listen to me. I have a story to tell you. It's your responsibility, your kuleana, to remember this and tell it as your own to your children and your grandchildren. And then off he would go on this rambling tale of our family. And like the family tree was really important to him, like who your ancestors were. And he called it the family bush or the family hedge, because unlike those genealogical charts, the oak tree that starts at the top and goes down like this, ours was more like a hedge, because there were so many huge families, and it was just tangled cross-generational marriages and just who married who and who had which children and who raised them. that was important to him. And he would tell those stories once he had our attention.
Yes.
Sit down, listen. He would tell us these stories, and he told them the same way every time, because that was important. So that it didn't just sort of like, well, didn't you say it was somebody or other else? He had to tell it the same way every time. And he had about over 300, he could spout over 350 names of family, relatives, just to keep it straight with us. And that was just the family tree. That wasn't even the stories he told us. So yeah, Uncle Paul, I got his picture.
Oh, yes.
Picture of
For
him.
those of you who are watching this.
Watching. He was, I think it's here. Oh, here. This is him.
Oh,
This is Uncle Paul.
oh, how beautiful.
That's my dad.
Handsome. My gosh, he's a handsome man.
Auntie Rose, Auntie Sophie.
And that's your dad's brothers and sister?
Yes. Yes, 4 of them. 4 of the 16.
4 of the 6, right, 4 of the 16.
Dad was 13 of 16, and Uncle Paul was 12 of 16. So they were down the list, the younger.
Yes. Wow. So now you grew up on Salt Spring Island.
Yeah.
And Uncle Paul is telling you stories. And so when did you always know that you were Hawaiian and First Nations? Like, did you always know that you were Hawaiian?
Yes. Because Uncle Paul got his information, all his stories from his mother. Now, her name was Matilda Naukana. Her father was William Naukana, he was Hawaiian, married to an Indian woman, probably many. I think he had many wives and many families. So when she told her stories, it was all leaning towards the Hawaiian side of our heritage, because that's what she knew.
Right.
But we always knew that was in there, and we always knew the First Nations side of our heritage, because of just the way, again, it's that your ancestors, they teach you what they know. And so all of that knowledge came from them, was all about our First Nations and Hawaiian heritage.
So tell us a little bit about where you come from and your family bush, as it were, your tangled family bush.
The hedge.
The hedge.
Yeah, well, the Hawaiian side of our journey here in the Pacific Northwest started with my great grandfather. He was a man named Naukana, and they called him John Cox Naukana. Now, the story behind that, again, oral history, and actually, no, it's written in some of the journals from the explorers of the day. They called him John Cox because apparently he resembled either one of the crewmen on the ship or someone in the forts that he built, whose name was John Cox. So they put in John Cox and just put his name on the end like a surname. But Naukana was, like in many indigenous cultures, you have one name. You don't have Bill Smith. You have Naukana Palau. So yeah, so they that's when Naukana became a surname for us. So
interesting.
Yeah. He's the one that came here first, and he came here in 1811. So it was way before there were any borders. Like, it wasn't the United States and Canada. It wasn't British Columbia, Washington, or it was not. It was all of that area, British Columbia, right down to parts of to California and out through Montana and Idaho. That entire area, the Americans called it Oregon Territory. The British called it the Columbia District, but it was the same lump of land. It was just the British outlook or the American outlook,
Right.
British and the Americans were always fighting each other over who owned what. So that was Oregon country, Columbia District. So he arrived then. So he didn't come to BC. He didn't come to Salt Spring Island. He was here on the Pacific Northwest. And they brought the Hawaiians here to help set up the fur trading posts. The fur trade had not been established here in the Pacific Northwest in the 1800s. Back east, Quebec and Manitoba, Ontario, they'd been plying the fur trade for centuries, since the
Right.
60s. They knew there was a gold mine out here in the West Coast. They just couldn't figure out how to get out here at that time.
Right.
They brought the Hawaiians up trying to set up the first fur trading post, which they did. And it was an American ship that brought them here. A lot of people credit the Hudson's Bay Company with bringing the Hawaiians here. And they were instrumental, but much later on, but at least 10 years or so after they'd established the fur trade. The Americans, it was a ship called the Tonquin, and it was owned by America's first, I think, their first multimillionaire, John Jacob Astor. He owned the ship. He funded the whole expedition, trying to get his feet on the ground first here with the fur trade.
Interesting. Is that where, like, I might have nothing to do with it, but like the Astoria hotels and things like that, is that any connection? Do you know? Or
It might be the fur trading post they built out here, the very first one, when they finally did arrive, they called it Fort Astoria, and directly named after John Jacob Astor.
interesting.
Astoria hotels, they probably do have something to do with him, because that's an old name. We'll have to Google it.
We'll have to Google it.
It's on Google, it's for sure.
Yeah, that's right. They could never lie to us on Google.
Me and technology. It took me 40 minutes how to figure out to get on this thing.
That was because this is funny. So while you're listening, you can know that while we were trying to do this Zoom call, first of all, we had to figure out how for Kate to get on, and then we had it on and I couldn't hear her. And I had to actually call my husband at work, and he had to do a three-way FaceTime kind of a thing. And it turned out it was me that didn't have my proper speaker on. I'm not very technologically fit.
Yeah,
That's just the truth. Oh my gosh. So they've come up. Nawakana has come up. Did he have a family back in Hawaii?
Oh yes, I'm sure he did.
Yeah.
He came up in his late 30s, early 40s. He was it was 1810. 1811 is when they came up here, January or so of 1811. Now, okay, back up a year there in Hawaii, 1810. That's when this guy named King Kamehameha the First.
You may have heard of him.
You may have heard of him. He established the sovereign kingdom of Hawaii in that year. They've been battling for 20, 30 years for him to be the king. I'm the boss of you all. And that's when he established it. So a year later, he's sending some of his people on this journey. The Americans approached him. They wanted a workforce. They would take some of the Hawaiian people to help them build the forts, to sail the ships. The Hawaiians are fabulous navigators, so they needed a workforce. And so the Kamehameha decided, okay, I'll send some of my people. There was quite a deal, I'm sure, that went on. You got to pay me some money for using my people, or pay them. I think they had a 3-year contract, and I think at the end of it, they got $100 and a new set of clothes, something like that. It was really pretty paltry pay for 3 years' work, but nevertheless. Yeah, so Kamehameha, the maritime nations of the world had been visiting Hawaii for decades at this point, 30, 40 years. So he was quite in tune with the Americans and the British and all the people that had come. So I think, it might have been his opportunity to send emissaries to these other places, or the places where they had been coming from, send his people. They became his eyes and his ears up here to figure out, what do they got that we need, and what have we got that we can trade with them?
Right.
And everybody had come to him. Now he's reaching out. So he sent some of his people. He sent 24 Hawaiians on that first journey. A few Hawaiians had arrived up here on other expeditions, but just like one person on the ship, or nothing like this adventure.
Right.
So he sent 24 of them, my great-great-grandfather being one of them, and he seemed to be a man of importance, because I found a lot written about him. There's notes of him in the journals and memoirs and things like that. They mention this guy, John Cox Naukana, all the time. And the story, well, it's not really a story. His father was a man named Kamanava. Kamanava was one of Kamehameha's high muckimucks. That's Chinook high Ali'i chief. When Kamehameha took over the whole islands, he had the 5 Kona chiefs, I think they called them, five men in any case that were his go-to guys. So this man Kamanava was the father to John Cox Naukana.
So he was your great grandfather.
And he
right?
was
Okay.
He was a twin. He had a twin brother named Kemeaomoku. They talk about the royal twins. That's those 2 guys, Kemeaomoku and Kamanava. They're on their Hawaiian coat of arms. There's one holds a spear, that's Kemeaomoku, and on the other side, the kahili, the big feather staff.
Yes.
That's Kamanava. That's my triple great grandfather. So Kamehameha probably chose my great great grandfather because he's a son of his chief.
Yes,
So,
you could trust him.
Yeah, send your important people. I think all those first men who came, the 24, were probably all somehow related to that king's court, because of course he's going to send his people that he trusts and he knows.
Wow. This is fascinating because, I mean, we know so little about how anyone got anywhere. Really, we understand about, contact or colonization but that's a very big word for something that does not describe people like your family that came.
Yeah.
And many people that came, actually, I mean, it's other than, so I like that it's and I remember when we were talking very early on, like, this is many years ago, and someone had told me, and wrongfully so, that the Hawaiians were slaves and that's how they were brought here. And I remember saying, oh, right, so the Hawaiians were slaves, right, when they came, and you said no. That, and you corrected me on that. And it was interesting because there's always people, well, when people don't know, a story is made up to try to fill in that gap of knowledge that is missing. But you have this, I was gonna say, we went on what do you call it? The ghost walk here in Victoria together once. We took our grandkids. My grandkids, not your grandkids, but we took my grandkids, and for those listening, so we're going on this walk, and these historians and people who are of the, I don't really know what it's called, but there's some sort of a ghost society or something like that in Victoria. But as we're going through the walk and they're naming all these names, and these are names I'd heard before because of you, because of some of these were your family members or people that your family member had dealings with. And then you would say to me, okay, yes, that's true, but here's the backstory to that story. It was so fascinating. There's a whole other company I'm going to form for you. The backstory to the ghost stories.
Following along in the background, correcting them.
Well, it's interesting to have someone, because you're not, I mean, I don't want to say just as in only as in it doesn't matter. You are driven, your passion was to find out everything you could about your family. And through that, you have become a rather well-known historian for all things Hawaiian in this area.
It seems that way.
It does. I would say so. You have been asked to do tours and talks at universities and many places. So you tripped and fell right into that.
I guess I sort of did, like mostly. I have a cousin on the big island of Hawaii, and she found me on the internet.
Ta-da!
I am so good with the internet. But it was a family tree program that came up. I had been handwriting the whole family hedge. And someone said, oh, you can go online and they have a blank tree or form and you just fill in the names. And I was, oh, I'm for that. So I figured it out. I got the blank. I started filling in the names and I got up to about 500 names and it just went, too many names, can't go any farther. but I've only scratched the surface, right? So the whole family tree thing, I had to sort of handwrite anyway, and I have yards of it here. But finding all of my ancestors led me through just that little narrow path of the Hawaiians. There's so much more to the story that I don't know because I don't know their histories. Right. So I've had to learn a bit about the general idea of the Hawaiians and why they arrived and how and that sort of thing. But most of my history and my stories go directly down my family tree because that's what I know.
Yes. But it is fascinating because not only that you know so much about your own family, which not everyone does. And I would say that the average person of your average white guy, a lot, not everyone. I will say that I wasn't raised, and most people that I know that come from either European or something like that descent, this was not something that was taught to a lot of us. There may be many people who were taught that way. I wasn't so much. And I think that it's an amazing thing. So there's something even deeper though, besides knowing about your family, besides knowing the history. And you just touch a little bit about the importance, whether that's a spiritual importance or there's something so deep about knowing your ancestors. That's can you explain that a little bit?
Well, your ancestors, without our ancestors, we wouldn't be here.
Right.
Quite simple, without them. So to know them and what they contributed to our lives is just the most important to me. Honoring our ancestors, I've heard it. I don't know where I got these words from, but it's constantly in my head that honoring our ancestors reminds us of who we are and where we came from. It acknowledges the fact that our lives were built on the foundations that they laid. And that one day it reminds us that we will be the ancestors.
Yes.
What are we passing on? So it's just important to know where you came from. And if you don't know a lot of it, that's okay. Know back to your parents. How did they affect your life? Your grandparents. Most people can go back as far as their grandparents. Like if you look at a family tree, everybody has two parents. Sometimes they got four these days.
Right.
Those blended families, but you mostly have two parents, birth parents. Then you have 4 grandparents, 8 great grandparents, 16 great great grandparents. So when I talk of John Cox Naukana, he's only 1/16th branch of the great grandparents. There's so many more of them. And as you said, I don't know much about the European side of my ancestry. I have Scottish and English, lots of First Nations, Hawaiian. They're all mixed in there.
Right. But it's figuring that part out, right? It's an interesting thing. Now, with your help, and I've been doing a little bit exploring, and my Uncle John. So my Uncle John is the last remaining sibling in my dad's family of 13. And thankfully for me, he's the guy, and for all of us, he's the guy that was really into genealogy. So he's created a book. He is the holder of this information. And I've become so very curious about it. So there I am, I'm on ancestry.com and I'm on looking at his book and I'm trying to figure it out. And I chose, like you, I chose one path to go down for now because it's just too much. That's what I found. So what I chose, I'm going to tell you how I chose this. Well, for a few reasons. So my mom was adopted. So I chose to not in no way dishonoring the people who adopted her. Just I wanted to have an understanding of my biological roots to start with. That's where I started. But because my mom was adopted, I took that out of the equation only because, the people that did not keep her for now, I'm not going to search them out too much. And the people that adopted her, I have my memories of them, but I thought, so I went to my dad's mom's side. And I think that one of the reasons that I went there was because I'm a Nana. And I remember my cousin, who is one of the first of all of the cousins, right? So her dad was the oldest and she was the firstborn of them. So she's, not quite 20 years older than me, but, like a generation ahead of me. And she has wonderful stories of my Nana, her Nana, that she knew because she was alive when she was younger and they lived on the farm. And so she, when our grandmother lived in town at one point, as people age, they tend to move off the farms if they can and come into town a bit. She lived with her for some time while she was going to school because there was no school where they were. And something happened to me. And I remember thinking, because I'm a Nana now, and I thought, I know the depth to which I love my grandkids. And I thought, she would love me like that.
Yep.
Even though she's never met me, she loves me like that. And it was so profound for me. I go again. I'm the crybaby. Kate is not, just so you know. She's a big meanie and I'm a big softie. And so that's the path I've gone down. And since I started that, and you've been helping me with all of that, I can't believe the history that I found about my family. It's amazing. I didn't know I could have found those things out before. So if you're listening and if you're curious at all, pick a grandparent and go back just one grandparent more, or go back to where they originated from. And you just start Googling, and there is a wealth of information that you can actually start to tie your actual family to. I was amazed. And when I was doing my research, as I was telling you, that so my grandmother was born in Glengarry, Ontario, or came from Glengarry, Ontario, or her family did. And she was a MacDonnell. But then I was getting mixed up because there was Glengarry in Scotland. And I thought, well, I don't understand. Like, am I mixing these things up? Well, no, they're the same family. And that's a whole story for another day. When they, let's just say, arrived in Canada, never mind. After they were the boot was given and horrible things, and after all of the, anyways, when much of Scotland was losing their land, as much of the Indigenous people were here, and they came over. They were the Glengarrys, the MacDonnells of the Glengarry from Scotland, who settled here. So then all of a sudden, now I just had to explore that. And for me, it was that easy, but I learned that from you. I wouldn't have known how to do that before.
Yeah, there's a wealth of information out there. Uncle Paul, for all his teachings to us, it was all oral history.
Wow.
As I said, he was quadriplegic. He did not get around. He had me write letters. I remember writing letters for him to the archives and asking for birth certificates, or do you have a birth record for people? And like back then, it was the snail mail. You wrote the letter, you sent it, and maybe 2 weeks later, you get an answer back. Nope, we can't find it. So as the internet world came in, then it searching took on a whole new outlook. Now I can start searching through, like, you just type in BC archives, and up comes their site. You can search births, deaths, marriages, colonial marriages, baptisms. It's all in there.
Yes.
And there's way more to it than that I haven't even explored yet. Ancestry.ca, another one. They hook up, I think, to the archives and give you lots of information on births and deaths. But they also go into like ship's manifests. I found my grandmother on my mom's side coming back from England in 1918 on a ship, arriving at Halifax, final destination Victoria. And then 2 months later, she had my mom. You know? So that sort of information, you see
Wow.
that they were traveling. It's a wealth of information if you know how to use the internet.
Yes, and that's part of it, right? Is doing the maneuvering and kind of and finding our way through all of that.
Sometimes I'm pretty lucky, and other times I start poking away at things. I go, okay, I give up.
Yeah, I can't right now.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's just an amazing thing to find out, like you said, understanding where we came from and understanding our ancestry and why it's important. I can't believe that we're at the end of our time for today already. Kate, thank you so much for this incredible information. And we're gonna do another episode or 20, I'm sure.
Right.
And finding out so much more and why it's, pardon me?
I got lots to tell yet.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I know.
Scratch the surface.
I know, and it's exciting to me, and I really hope that our listeners are intrigued, and if they weren't already excited and curious about their own families, that this will invite them into that, so that we can all understand. There's a lot of talk about history lately, and it's not. It's almost like it's a dirty word, and it's not. It's where we come from, and knowing who our families are and knowing all of that's an important thing. So, Kate, thank you so much.
You're welcome, my friend,
for sharing this. This has just been fabulous, and I can't wait to get into some more of this. But for now, this is Ali and Find Your Joy. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today, and do remember, you are loved.
Yeah. Aloha.
Thanks so much for joining me today. If you found a piece of your joy in this episode, I would love to hear about what came up for you so that we can continue to grow the impact of this show. Thanks again. See you soon. And remember, find your joy.